Welcome, miss.
Thank you, sir.
The town of Dry Creek stood silent under a blazing Wyoming sun as the stagecoach arrived, bringing with it a trembling young woman clutching a faded carpet bag and a heart full of uncertain hope. Clayton Hartman, a broad-shouldered rancher known for his cold pride, stepped forward to inspect his mail-order bride with the same critical eye he used on cattle. His younger brother Samuel watched from the wooden boardwalk, noting how the woman's hopeful smile faltered as Clayton's gaze turned dismissive and unkind. Clayton looked her up and down once and then loudly declared that she was far too plain and scrawny to be the wife of a prosperous man like himself, shattering the quiet air. With a wave of his hand, he turned his back on the bewildered woman and strode away, leaving her stranded in the dust as townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances. What happened next, however, was a twist of fate so profound that would be recounted around campfires and kitchen tables across the frontier for decades to come. Samuel Hartman, whose heart had always been softer than his brother's, stepped down from the boardwalk and gently tipped his hat to the abandoned woman whose name he learned was Abigail. He spoke no grand promises, but simply offered her a place to rest and a hot meal at his modest homestead on the edge of the prairie, away from prying eyes and judgment. Abigail, whose pride had been crushed but not her spirit, accepted the kindness with a grateful nod, and together they rode out in Samuel's old buckboard beneath a wide and endless sky. Over the following days, Samuel expected her to rest and move on, but Abigail insisted on earning her keep by tending the garden, mending fences, and cooking hearty meals with surprising skill. She revealed that back east, she had run a small farm with her late father, and every task she performed brought life back to Samuel's once lonely ranch in ways he had never imagined. Evenings were spent on the porch where they talked about lost dreams, the cruelty of first impressions, and the quiet promise of a second chance under the star-strewn heavens. Samuel soon realized that Abigail's gentle laughter and unbreakable determination had filled a void inside him that he hadn't even known existed before her sudden arrival. Meanwhile, Clayton's ranch began to suffer as his harsh treatment of hired hands drove him away, and his solitary arrogance left him with few allies in the territory. Word eventually reached Clayton that his brother had not only sheltered the rejected bride, but was prospering alongside her, a fact that stung his pride deeper than a rattlesnake bite. One autumn afternoon, Clayton rode out to Samuel's homestead with the intent to belittle the arrangement, but the sight that greeted him stole the bitter words right off his tongue. There stood Abigail, not as the timid girl he remembered, but as a confident woman with sun-kissed cheeks and eyes that sparkled with the contentment of a life well chosen. The small ranch had transformed into a thriving haven with a new barn, healthy livestock, and wildflowers blooming along the fence line, all evidence of her dedicated hands and their growing partnership. Samuel stood beside her with a quiet strength, and when Clayton saw the simple gold band on her finger, he understood that he had lost something he never had the wisdom to value. Clayton tried to muster a condescending remark, but it died in his throat as Abigail offered him a cup of cool water and a smile devoid of any malice or vengeance. For the first time in his life, the proud rancher felt a genuine shame that settled deep in his bones, witnessing the happiness he had recklessly thrown away out of sheer vanity. He left without a word of apology, but the silence between the two brothers spoke volumes, carving a chasm that only time and humility could ever hope to bridge. Samuel and Abigail were married in a simple ceremony by a traveling preacher, with the whole valley as their witness and the golden prairie grass swaying like a blessing from the earth itself. Their love story spread quietly across the territory, not as a scandal, but as a testament to the idea that true worth often hides behind a humble first appearance and a heart willing to look deeper. Months turned into years, and the couple's prosperity grew with a new herd and a child on the way, while Clayton's holdings dwindled under the weight of his own bitterness and isolation. One harsh winter, a blizzard trapped Clayton alone in his cabin with dwindling supplies, and it was Samuel who braved the storm to find him. guided by a loyalty that defied old wounds. Abigail had insisted that he go, saying that no man deserved to die alone, and her compassionate spirit forged the first crack in the wall of Clayton's stubborn pride. When Samuel arrived, half-frozen but resolute, he found his older brother feverish and humbled, and without a word of accusation, he nursed him back from the edge of death. In the flickering firelight of that cramped cabin, Clayton finally uttered the apology that had festered inside him for years, admitting that his rejection had been the greatest mistake of his life. Samuel listened and then clasped his brother's shoulder, telling him that the past could not be changed, but that a man could still choose the path of redemption with every sunrise that followed. When the storm cleared, Clayton returned to his ranch a changed man, and though he never regained his former wealth, he slowly earned back the trust of those he had wronged. Abigail gave birth to a healthy son on the very day the first spring blossoms appeared, and they named him Jonah, a name that meant a fresh beginning and a faithful heart. Clayton visited his nephew with a humble gift of a hand-carved wooden horse, and in that small gesture, the family began to stitch together the torn fabric of brotherhood with threads of grace. Years later, when people asked Samuel about the day he watched his brother reject a mail-order bride and then took her home himself, he would smile and say that he only did what any decent heart would do. But those who knew the full story understood that his simple act of kindness had not only rescued a soul, but also reshaped the destiny of an entire family, planting love where disdain had once sown barren ground. The tale of the rejected bride and the cowboy who claimed her became a treasured piece of frontier lore, reminding everyone that the West was built not just on grit and gunpowder, but on compassion and second chances. Abigail's garden grew so abundant that travelers would stop just to marvel at the sunflowers standing taller than a man on horseback, a living symbol of how neglected seeds can flourish with care. Samuel never sought glory, but the community came to respect him as a man who measured wealth not in gold, but in the laughter that echoed from his porch every evening. When Jonah grew old enough to understand, his father told him the story of a dusty day in Laramie, and a choice made not from pity, but from a recognition of a kindred spirit in need. The boy listened with wide eyes, and from that moment, he carried a quiet conviction that true strength lay in gentleness, and that the measure of a man was found in his unseen mercies. Clayton eventually sold his remaining acreage and moved to a small cabin near his brother's land, where he spent his final years whittling toys for his nephew and helping with the cattle without demanding recognition. The two brothers often sat together on the fence rail at dusk, speaking little but understanding much, their reconciliation sealed not by grand speeches, but by the faithful presence of shared silence. Abigail became known as a healer in the region, using herbs from her garden to tend to neighbors near and far, and many said her hands carried a warmth that could mend not just bodies but wounded spirits. On summer nights, the family would host gatherings where fiddle music drifted across the plains, and the story of Samuel and Abigail was retold, always with the reminder that grace often arrives in the humblest of packages. Visitors from distant towns would travel to see the homestead where a discarded bride had planted roots deep enough to anchor a family for generations, and they left with hearts fuller than when they arrived. Through all the trials of weather, market crashes, and the passing of loved ones, the legacy of that one compassionate choice remained as sturdy as the old oak tree that shaded their dooryard. When Samuel was old and gray, he penned a letter to be read after his passing, which simply said that the greatest treasure he ever found was not in the ground, but in the courage of a woman and the chance to love her. Abigail outlived him by 5 quiet years, spending her remaining days teaching her grandchildren how to read the land and the sky, insisting that every soul carried a hidden story worth discovering. The old homestead eventually passed to Jonah, who raised his own family there with the same values, and the tale of the rejected mail-order bride who found her home became a bedtime legend told to every child born under that roof. Even now, on quiet evenings when the wind hums through the prairie grass. Some say you can still hear the echo of a buckboard and the laughter of a woman who turned rejection into the richest of lives. So the cowboy who watched his brother reject a mail-order bride and then took her home himself never sought fame. Yet his story continues to inspire those who believe that the West was carved by quiet heroes. What began as a moment of shame and cruelty blossomed into a lifetime of love because one man refused to look away, proving that the open range offers not just danger, but also boundless redemption for the willing heart. And every time the tale is retold beneath a canopy of stars, it reminds us all to look beyond the surface. For sometimes what appears to be a rejected stone becomes the cornerstone of a great legacy built on kindness. If this tale of unexpected grace and frontier love stirred something deep within you, then kindly press the like button and subscribe to West Old Stories Official for more remarkable sagas from the untamed West. Share your thoughts in the comments about what you would have done in Samuel's boots, and let us know which Western curiosity you'd love to hear next so we can keep these timeless campfire stories burning bright together.